And so the content I will present will probably take 30, maybe 40 minutes. And so there will be all sorts of opportunities along the way, especially since we have kind of a delicate audience, for you to stop and ask questions. The purpose of me being here today on behalf of Norm Ryder and the whole committee is to really solicit your response. This is all part of our peer review, part of our validation and verification of the model before we look to deploy this capability for Informs, not only to its members, but really to the world. There are a lot of great models out there, from what Capgemini, Accenture, Tom Davenport, and others have published. We are offering another vignette that has some unique characteristics that we think might be practical, applicable, and important to you, all of us as practitioners and evangelists of operations research, the management sciences, and ultimately analytics and decision-making information. So with that, we'll get started. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. The Informs Analytic Maturity Model, which you'll hear and see referenced as AMM, or the AM, this is the agenda we will cover. I'll give you a slight background that's going to tell you a little bit of review of who the committee is and where we've been and where we intend to go. Talk briefly about antecedent, and I've already kind of shown that card. Give you an overview of the model. And then one of the things we've been really hard at work in the last couple of months is benchmarking this model against other models and making sure that there's some uniqueness to it. That we're not just taking another model and rebranding it, but we actually have some quality or some value in the proposition of you or your businesses utilizing it for the assessment of yourselves and of others you might be asked to help. We'll also be talking about how this model will grow from, at the moment, being a qualitative model to being a quantitative model as we start to ingest a lot of information from the folks that have used it. And I'll frame that way forward as well. And then, of course, I'll be asking for your input. Now, actually, there is a bullet that I inserted here about 2 a.m. last night. And that was, in the times that we have presented this in the past, we have kept the scorecard in the backup slides to the executives and whatever have you. You all didn't come for me to do a lot of hand waving and promising you of things to come. You probably came to actually see the thing. So I've inserted the 3 scorecards into the last 4 slides of the brief, and we'll take some time, even though the resolution is kind of poor and you'll have to squint to read, we'll take some time to talk about it in practice. And I hope you'll pause and ask some questions, because Norm in spirit will be taking notes, but Barry and I will certainly be taking notes as to the feedback you offer so that we can take it back to the committee and discuss best ways forward. We certainly want you all to feel like you have some equity and some buy-in and had a chance to shape this. So let me give you a little bit of the background, and let's go ahead and draw your eyes to the call out. When Inform started advertising, talking that we were looking at developing an analytic maturity model, we had 48 petitions for support for assessments by April 2013, and that number grew to 76 in July of this same year. So there is a demand for an analytic maturity assessment, because apparently some of those other models that are out there aren't scratching the itch that people have. And they've identified through the other birds of the feather and sessions that we've sponsored that perhaps Informs has a service to provide that might be unique. The purpose of the analytic maturity model is so that organizations can prudently invest in the development of their data analytics program. We call this analytic maturity. It's not just about the data, and it's not just about the analysis. It's about how all that comes together in the organization for better decision making. Where are we? Where do we need to go? How do we compare against other similar organizations? These assessments, like I said, will provide them with a benchmark against other similar organizations in their industry. And the benchmarks provide the context for the evangelists, the practitioners, the believers, the agents of change that I believe you and many folks in Informs are, to help develop and execute those action plans, to justify the hard thing that it is. And I am at headquarters Marine Corps. Justifying resources is impossible. But how do I start to say, it's not just what a captain says, what I say. It is what Informs, reputable, has said. And it helps us target key areas for growth within the organization. The approach, the Analytic Maturity Model Committee formed in June 2012 with Norm Ryder making a first pitch to the executives at Informs, given the green light to then begin developing the process by which analytic professionals would assess themselves and their organizations. At headquarters Marine Corps, I was the director of the Logistics Analysis Operations Office. I have used the analytics maturity model, earlier versions, to assess how we were doing things at LX as a small shop of 9. But I've also used it to assess personally, not endorsed, total Marine Corps' assessments of the analytic maturity model. So this is good both in the micro and in the macro. And it has helped me understand the path forward that I needed to advocate when I was then working for the Deputy for Installation and Logistics, and now the path forward as I work for the Deputy for the CIO for the Marine Corps, the Deputy for All Information and Data. The project furthers informs penetration in the analytics sector and offers an opportunity to add additional service offerings. So it helps us, again, as I was speaking with this gentleman before, helps us publish doctrine, helps us publish template, and help us organize a community against some good rallying principles. The committee, like I said, is the chair of Norm Ryder. We have Terry Harrison, past Informs president, being a very obviously important member of our committee. Jim Williams from Land O'Lakes, Rob Benson, Spinnaker, myself at Accenture and the Marine Corps Reserves, John Flynn at DRC, and then of course we have great support from Melissa, Barry, and Ezraj from the Analytics of the Informs staff. Before I go to the antecedent, let me just ask you quickly, is there any question or concern with the background? Okay, let's go to the antecedent. And show of hands, who have read this book, Competing on Analytics? Okay, great. It's a good volume. I think probably should be on the bookshelf of most analysts. In this book, Tom Davenport and Gene Harris introduced the Delta model, which, like Capgemini, like even IBM's model, and a lot of others that you'll see us benchmark ourselves across in forthcoming slides, is a model that's out there that IIA, which is the International Institute for Analytics, which they market on their website, and I'll allude to that more later. But the antecedent, Tom Davenport, Gene Harris, introduced this back with Competing Analytics. And of course gives us great foundation as we did our literature review and looked to our right and left as to what the other models are, what they do well, and where we can improve. Where can we improve? And what can we provide as a service? Informs can provide as a service an organizational framework for how they can return value on their analytics program. Providing those advocates for change, like I said, and we alluded to earlier, the justification they need in making a business case for the ROI of an analytics program. How does this happen? Just as I did, and I alluded to at Headquarters Marine Corps, an analyst can sit down by themselves, or they can sit down as a committee on a team and do an assessment at the micro or at the macro level. They either lead or perform a self-assessment, and the scorecard identifies the current state and future goal state of the system. So it's not just enough, we believe it informs, to say, you're immature. We say, you're immature, and these are the weights you need to begin lifting to develop those other analytic muscles that you'll be needing in the future. And Informs will provide help and coaching as needed, meaning that the committee and other proponents, whether we certify these or not, will be a resource that that company can call back to and say, explain to me what Informs is saying on the scorecard regarding this aspect of maturity. Or what is that best next step? What do I need in terms of data, in terms of a system, in terms of a process to help me improve my maturity index? The member baselines their organization skills against other like organizations. So this is where I'm going to talk again later on, taking it from a qualitative model where you're assessing yourself to then start benchmarking yourself against not just 1, 2, but 20, 30, and over time hundreds of other similar organizations in your industry. How do I compare against other logistics services? How do I compare against other data providers? How do I compare against other retail agents? The member develops an action plan and executes that action plan with Informs, hopefully, being an advocate and an assistant as they grow themselves and their maturity. We look at analytic maturity in 3 different silos with 4 domains in each one. We look at maturity in terms of how good an organization is, in terms of their organization, their analytic capabilities, and their data and infrastructure. And please pause me at this point if you don't quite understand any of these terms. We will provide further definition for them in a forthcoming slide, but I'd like to assuage any fears or concerns you have from the offset. In the organization, we are assessing the leadership impact. Do they have that qualified CAO, that CIO, that understands, interprets, and applies analytics? Do they have the people, the yous of the world, to help them execute their mission? Do they have measures? Do they have an enterprise analytic framework for the metrics? Do they have a balanced scorecard? Or those approved series of things that are measured and assessed that help them move the enterprise forward with benchmarks and assessments? Do they have the business processes, which are obviously fueling all those things I just spoke to? The analytic capabilities. Do they have an analytic framework? Do they have a process, a system in place by which they develop and deploy analysis tools and methods? Do they have the roles and the skills, the peoples at the other levels to execute these things, both the people that interpret the information and the people that develop the information? Do they have the analytic services and do they have the analytic processes, both the data and the understanding of how to make that data and those systems operate together? And then the data and the infrastructure. How healthy is their data? And data can always be more healthy. I think all of our data is probably ill to some form or other, but is it healthier than others? What is the access to their data? What is the access to their systems? Do things live in a CSV Excel spreadsheet environment on a desktop, or are they deployed to a server or moving to a cloud? Are the analyses and the assessments performed traceable? Are they accredited? And is there an analytic architecture in place to make these things easier to repeat? The scorecard allows the person or the team to assess themselves in each one of these pillars across each one of these assessments, and we use a Likert scale. So it isn't, I've got it, I don't got it. It is, I am poor, I am medium, or I am low, I am medium, or a high, on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 to 3 is in the low domain, 4 to 7 is in the medium domain, and 8 to 10 is in the high. And so that Likert scale, we believe, is also very important. I think you'll see how that Likert scale helps us improve the resolution on other models that are out there today. Before I go off of this slide, I'll show you what the next slide is. Are there any questions? Perhaps there aren't, because I promised you greater explanation before the forthcoming slide. So why does Informs care about this? Why is this an important part of what we do as a society and as our model of services we can provide to our members and other folks that look to us as an authority? Existing services and Informs are those shown in the blue lines, and the emergent services, the things that we believe that the analytic maturity model can help us with going forward, are shown with the orange lines. Let's talk about the blue first. You see that we do a lot of things with people through the recruiting connections. Perhaps some of you are either recruiting or being recruited at this conference. With regard to roles and skills, we offer recruiting connections, analytic skills training, the CAP, with certification, and continuing education and guidance surveys. Analytic services and analytic processes are done through benchmarking in our journals. So we do those things well. What can we do as a society to expand our services? Other places where we're seeing other startup groups, meeting groups, data science groups emerging, looking to organize themselves to the future services that perhaps Informs can provide. And some of those go to leadership impact, helping understand and mature measures, the business processes, the analytic framework, the health, the access, traceability, and analytic architecture that organizations and corporations ought to have. And we believe this is how the analytic maturity model will help to begin to develop the subject matter, the information that folks will ingest and look to as authoritative sources for where they're going, where they are, and where they need to go. So the development and integration tasks are underway. You'll see a timeline right after this slide, I believe. We have finalized the model scorecard and the self-assessment. I won't say we have finalized, we are finalizing. I'm going to look for your input to help us finalize it even further. The scorecard that I'm going to reveal to you today is one that still needs to be updated slightly based on a recent presentation as well, and I'll incorporate your revisions to it as well. But it's not just going to be a scorecard that we throw out there and say, fill it in. Like I said, there will always be that Informs coaching help of the committee and the practitioners that are willing to volunteer to that degree, but as well as the supporting help material. A guidebook is currently been developed and in draft form that will accompany on the Informs site to the members. We're validating the analytic maturity model and the self-assessment approach. We have actually deployed the model to several testers and had them score their organization and give us feedback to, does it accurately depict their organization, which we are then arbitrating. And then we are using their feedback for iterative adjustments. Some of those things I still have to make. We are communicating. I am communicating. This is member engagement. Thank you for coming. So please engage me now and after, and let us know where it can get better. Communicate the content and solicit feedback. I am soliciting feedback, both now and after the conference. If you'd like to send it to myself, to Norm Ryder, or even to Barry, we are all ears. This is our model as a society, and we want you to all feel like you've had a place in developing it. As well as multiple media outlets and other events. The camera right here. And Barry and the journals. There will be forthcoming literature. There's already been an article drafted and will be in a forthcoming journal. And there's been other information on the websites as well already. You can look for more of that. Kind of, you saw like the Certified Analytics Professional Exam rollout. I believe you'll see a little campaign like the Analytics Maturity Model as well. It's telling me that I got a plenary session with Ann Robinson. Time for us all to leave. And then obviously we're going to integrate the informed service framework to identify and make corrections and integrate with enablers. So there are some thoughts that we have, and we'd like to hear your thoughts on how it ought to be deployed, about making it accessible through the Inform's website. How do we deploy the model best? And moreover, how do we collect the data on the folks that are willing to identify themselves, or at least identify the industry, the sphere in which they operate, so we can then again start to develop that quantitative assessment among similar organizations. Okay, we're getting towards the model here, I promise, and it is towards the end. The Inform's Analytic Maturity Model Milestones, you see the orange dot, denotes where we are today. We have already had the iterative validation development approach. We are still in that. I think we'll be in that indefinitely. And we are moving forward towards making the Analytic Maturity Model online, available for testing, deployable to perhaps all y'all folks, and then available to all members sometime after April 14, the target being the Inform's Analytics Conference in Boston, which is coming up next April. The goal is to complete that and brief it in Boston. Any question on the timeline or content so far? It has seemed, at least to me, aggressive. Perhaps to you, slow. Now we're going to start. Now I'm going to show you two slides where there's a little bit of matrix, where we're going to benchmark against other models that exist. You'll see from left to right, there's the International Institute for Analytics, Capgemini, Gartner, and IBM. Now those are other chief models that we have determined exist throughout our industry, designed towards talking to operations research, analytics, information sciences, basically at the core of what we're getting to. If you represent any of these companies, we are not firing on your target. We're simply trying to distinguish how we might offer something different. What you see going top to bottom under Informs are the factors that we assess, the themes and the factors. Again, the theme of organization, how mature is your organization, analytics capability, how mature is analytics capability, and infrastructure and data. How mature is your data infrastructure to support analysis? And then the factors, the components with each one of those: people, leadership, measures, process, framework, roles and skills, services, processes, health, access, traceability, and analytics architecture. So in the case of IIA, you see that IIA's assessments does a really good job of looking at people, leadership, health, and access to the data. But where we feel that perhaps it isn't as complete as the Informs model is that Informs model also talks to framework, processes, measures, and traceability, and a few others. Likewise for Capgemini, Gartner, and IBM's models. This next benchmark that we'll provide shows the characteristics of each model. The Informs model, IIA, Capgemini, IBM, and Gartner. So the major themes in each model, in Informs, we have three major themes, and you can say, well, that's worse than IIA, Capgemini, Gartner, and IBM, isn't it? IIA has 5, Gemini 5, and Gartner 6, IBM 3. But the scored areas, so those components of the major themes, is where we are a little bit different. We have 12. And you can see those from left to right, the others. The levels of maturity, we offer 10, others 5 and 4. The Likert scale, we are the only model going to market that has a Likert scale incorporated. And I know a Likert scale is a simple thing, but in principle, causing the person to pause and determine where they are on that Likert scale. Offering the literature that distinguishes a 2 to a 3 and a 3 to a 4 is important, not just nuance. An as-is score informs IAA and Capgemini off that, but a goal score, so helping the person think about where they are and where they're going, is a whole other thing. And first of company. A milestone date, so not only do we say, where are you, where do you want to go, but we help coach, we help provide literature, where do we think you can get, how fast do we think you can get to that point, as well as a plan, and an online survey. If you look at the consult price, we believe, through quick market research, that Informs is very competitive, if not altogether free, and we will see again how that evolves over time. But we obviously want to offer it as different grades of services, which would be good for Informs to offer as well. Let me take that away. So I'm about to go in the final 4 slides, and we have been at half an hour. It's really fine for me to go through these next few slides quickly or to take another half hour on them. This is what's certainly going to cause a lot of feedback. If nothing hasn't already gotten to your crawl already to provide feedback on, I want to hear it. But in the next 3 slides, what I'm going to provide is basically what this scorecard looks like to date. Now, it is not the online virtual version. It is not what it's going to look like ultimately, but it is how we have organized it so far to do some of the testing that we have deployed thus far. 3 slides, 3 pages, 1 for organization, 1 for data infrastructure, and 1 for skills. I'm sorry that the resolution isn't great, but it prints out fantastic on an 8.5 by 11. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question about the slide earlier?
Sure, let's go back. And I'll go back to any slide, because I think the next 3 slides are going to be great to summarize on. Back one more, or on this one?
No, on this one.
Okay.
Before you ask the question, I believe that your voice won't be picked up by the microphone, so perhaps Aaron can repeat the question.
Absolutely. Great.
In the levels of maturity, let's say an organization is at level 6. What is the value to the organization to go to level 7?
So the question was, if an organization is at level 6, what's the value proposition of ever going to a level 7? Well, that is up to the CIO, CEO, CFO, CAO, you as an advocate, as an evangelist. Why do we need to be a level 7? Perhaps we're all together really great at being a level 3 or level 1, and perhaps that domain doesn't really apply to us. That is up to you. But when we start to show industry benchmarking, perhaps you'll start to see how your competitors are doing. And why do they have perhaps an advantage on you? Or perhaps why are they wasting senseless money on having something that doesn't amount to an advantage at all? So that's going to be open to your interpretation. So some of these skills might not be altogether relevant. One of the things that became obvious to us, both as we wrote it and as people gave feedback, they said, you know what, some of these roles and skills that you talk about, we are never going to have internally. We cannot afford our analysts. You guys are all expensive. We can't afford you. We will always have contractors, consultants come in. And so assessing that for us isn't relevant. Well, that's fine. There's just going to be a necessary caveat or a necessary gap in that score that we understand and interpret as an organization. But just because your organization decides not to invest in an analyst doesn't mean another organization isn't going to invest in an analyst too. So it's just benchmarking. So it's fine. You're not penalized by it whatsoever. Yes, sir.
I had a small problem here. I can see where you're very competitive in price and whatnot, but how do you compete with Capgemini and Gartner and stuff in terms of marketing, in terms of really bringing in the business, if that's the goal here?
Well, we're not turning ourselves, from last I heard, into a consultancy, and that is not the purpose.
Yeah, I've never heard of Informs doing this.
We're not. That is not the basis of anything the committee has advocated or talked about. But what we are trying to do is offer an alternative model that any group, whether you're ABC Consulting or XYZ analysts, you can go in there and, as opposed to developing your own model for assessing economic maturity, you can go in with the Informs maturity model and say, hey, we are partners with Informs. We work with Informs. We acknowledge this as a great peer-reviewed industry standard. And we are helping you. We both assess ourselves and assess you as here, and assess ourselves and you going there. So it provides a standard framework as opposed to a gospel here and a gospel there, but perhaps a standard gospel that a lot of the folks who participate, and we have a lot of great industry partners and a lot of great practitioners that can make use of this internally and independently of themselves. Like I said, I can attest to it as having been a user. As an early adopter at Headquarters Marine Corps, I use this assessment to frame for my leadership ways in which we could mature ourselves just a little bit. What did it cost the Marine Corps? Nothing. What was the risk to us? Nothing. What did it help me do? It helped me rely on a lot of the great thought of the committee, as opposed to going out there and trying to define what analytic maturity is according to Aaron Burciaga. No one cares what Aaron Burciaga thinks. And I don't know if everyone cares exactly only what Capgemini thinks, or IBM. IBM doesn't care what Capgemini thinks, and Capgemini doesn't care what Gartner thinks. That's why they're all competing. And so how do we, as a data, software, vendor, agnostic organization, how do we offer something that perhaps steps out of a lot of the other chafe, and something that might be a little bit more unbiased, more open, and hopefully more developed and more useful and more accessible to the folks who are looking to use it?
Does that also apply to the International Institute of Analytics? Because they also have a model which is independent.
So you can read about the Delta model and Competing on Analytics and on the website. And we have done all that review. And if you go to some of the sites like IBM's Analytic Maturity Model, and you go to IA's Maturity Model, you complete the survey, you find your score. If you'd like to know more, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Whereas we can give you a score, provide you some benchmarking, and offer you connections to coaching if you want to pursue that. So it's meant to be a first foot in the door. Is this enough for you to continue to understand yourself, assess yourself, and make strides forward? Or are you ready to now, having looked in the mirror, invest a little bit more, and we can provide you with some great connections, relays, or perhaps even just resource material to that end. I think if you go through any ORMS journal, you'll probably find, 9/10 of the information you need to develop yourselves more analytically. Yes, ma'am. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that, or would you have anything to add? I'm sorry, we'll come right
No,
back.
it's really, let's say if you want to have companies that assess themselves, they have to know that Informs is then probably the best way forward for them to assess themselves.
And it goes back to his question then,
Yeah.
marketing, right?
Yeah. And
Barry, you are the marketing genius.
I think that initially we'll be doing a lot of internal marketing, internal public relations. That will be making our members aware, using ORMS today, using email, using social media. Also, Analytics Magazine has a number of readers who are not members of Informs, and we'll be reaching out to them. We've been going out, besides our usual meetings that we perform ourselves, we've been attending meetings from groups like Predictive Analytics World, and we'll be using those forums as a way to reach a broader audience. We also participate in social media on groups like Analytic Bridge. We'll be using those fora also. And at a certain point, we're going to do an assessment and say to ourselves, how's the adoption, and what additional resources would we like to use to bring the Informs Analytic Maturity Model to a broader audience. So that, in a nutshell, is where we are at stage one of bringing this to the attention of the broader world.
There's no reason to me keeping secrets or thoughts. Again, these are all just thoughts of the committee. Nothing is a planned action or approved by Inform's executive board. Is as we get this marketing campaign out and get some early adopters through our own membership, how do we start to recognize those who have tested out and scored really well? Obviously, some companies are going to want to take this test and have it be non-disclosure. They're not going to want to show their 5, or perhaps for competitive advantage, they're not going to want to show their 10. Perhaps some folks, though, after having had a great success story, having moved from 6 to a 9, 6 to an 8, 6 to a 10, would want Informs to come in and certify that and acknowledge them with an award or with an article or with anything of the sort. So there is a good way in which an organization can demonstrate, can talk to the world that we are analytically mature. Everyone's cleaving to analysis, cleaving to big data, cleaving to big analytics and high performance computing. We have arrived, and we are using an industry standard to show that we have. And I believe that some organizations will like that, not all. But that is another opportunity for us to share what this model can do. You had a question?
I was just thinking that the only, in my opinion, the way that this could have the integrity is for Informs to offer it to the members free. Otherwise, you'd have people paying for it, and then you get the impression that it's biased. That's my opinion about it. So, you know, for me, it would motivate me more to be a member of Informs if I had access to this data, because the members are sharing this data, right?
So yeah, so what's the value proposition of ever being an Informs member? So I get a cool journal, I get access to an online thing, but if I can have access to a tool I can begin exercise. Again, these are the services
Right.
that, to my understanding, help me with Barry, that Informs wants to begin providing to members. And is this something that we are looking to make available to members, or we're still researching that, correct? But ultimately, is the direction we want to go.
Yeah, it's fair to say that it's our goal to be the leading professional association in analytics, and we encourage membership in Informs as part of that, and we'd love to see Informs grow, and we would love to provide this as a benefit to our members and to encourage others to become members so that they can get full use of an analytics maturity model. So yes, I very much agree with what you're suggesting.
Good.
Yeah. Like I said, you know, the man hours that I've gone into developing probably what seems to be a very simple scorecard, and then the supplemental materials have taken the better part of a year and a half or more. We've had really some Herculean efforts of great folks like John Flynn contributing. That's nothing that I believe, unless you made it your full-time job, you could replicate, and nor do I want to, because I don't want it to be the gospel calling to me. It's something that I'd rather be able to have access to, like I think you're advocating, and come and say, hey, look at the benefit of having me, who understands Informs, who goes to the fount of knowledge and applies those things for you in a best way. So that's where I see it being beneficial for me, and perhaps for you too. So I think the great point, I wrote it down, was definitely share that. Sir?
I think that's a great point too, because I know that Informs is trying to drive member value. But I'm just wondering, where do the consultants come from within the Informs ranks? How are you going to have to train or pick or decide who actually goes out into the world and on behalf of Informs and gives someone a score?
Aaron, may I take that
Please.
question? It's a little bit early in our development of exactly how we're going to go from self-assessment to things like this.
A proctored assessment. Yeah.
Proctored assessment. What I will say is that Informs has had a database of consultants in analytics that fell into disuse. Only in the last couple months, we've revived it, and we're going to re-inaugurate it. And it's based on people being members and people signing up and providing their areas of expertise. And this database will be searchable, particularly by members of Informs. So although we have not fully determined yet how we will be providing benefits once you've done your proctored assessment, it's fair to say that we'll be looking very, very much at this new database of consultants. I think we have a little bit under 100 right now, and we'll be asking our members, we'll be making them aware that it's coming back online, we'll be asking them to enroll, and at that point, we will be able to provide those who've gone through the analytics maturity model with a way of finding a consultant who meets their needs.
And that's what folks have asked for so far, those 76 that I alluded to by July this year. They've asked for Informs to deploy folks to help them. And of course, we haven't been able to meet that demand yet, but we're going to have to figure a way, and when we are talking about how do we deem those analysts ready and capable of understanding what the analytic maturity model is. And as I show on the slide that's coming up, the way in which, organization, what is the definition of organization? What is the definition of healthy? So there are words that we have emboldened, but of course that supplemental material provides pages that explain further what that document, what that question alludes to, explains it further. So we need to have kind of like a force that is balanced, that is working off a standard framework and taxonomy so that everyone's getting assessed the same way. Moreover, we have also talked as a committee about having some online training. If you guys have ever seen any of those deployed videos, so that if I am doing a self-assessment, I can perhaps either see a scenario acted out where there's a person leading a team for an assessment, and I can see what he is or she are highlighting, and make sure that I'm highlighting those same things, so that again we are all approaching it the same way. So that is a way in which we start to standardize our self-assessments. But then that's kind of like the basic model. The deluxe model, which Informs will provide, isn't any more access to any more data or any more of the model. It's just the connection to an analyst who can probably help you take this to the next level, has had some experience with other organizations, or perhaps in the research and development of this.
Maybe it's interesting to look at how the Supply Chain Council does this. So that they have, let's say, trade professionals, and they also, let's say, have those trade professionals share their insights. So you also standardize the way in which they assess a supply chain or the maturity of, in this case, a supply chain management function within an organization.
So you're saying standardizing amongst industries
Yeah.
that is professionally deployed. That's a great point. So you're right. So just as we were talking about benchmarking yourself against industry standards, having those industries of each domain, and that's something that we would hopefully be able to have filtered and identified. So these are the analytic professionals that can help you certify. Here's the supply chain domain. Here's the data.
Also, let's say the professionals that assist companies to have them share their insights. So that way you assure that they all act in the same manner.
Like a wiki or sort.
Sort of, but also, let's say, they should be the ones that also, let's say, take that model further. And so add new things or adapt things. So that way, Informs isn't really, let's say, the organization that has to do that all the way by himself, but use, let's say, the community
Yeah.
to extend the model and make it more.
There you go. So don't deploy something that's going to die a year from now, but making a living, growing model.
Indeed.
And perhaps that would be something that we'd share at the analytics conference or at the annual meeting, updates to the model. And perhaps that would be a forum for arbitrating, talking about those developments and changes to the model. I think that's fantastic, and that's the dynamic nature of Informs that I would like to, that I appreciate today and I'd like to see going forward. Certainly with the analytic maturity model. Could you make sure we capture that? I'll write out the next
I have a question.
book. Yes, ma'am.
There'd also be some sort of vetting process for these members who are helping on Inform's behalf in this database that we're talking about. Just because you sign up doesn't necessarily
Yes, ma'am.
mean that you're an expert in supply chain. You may think you are, but will there be some sort of governance over
Yes.
the people that are helping?
Yes, we had talked about that, and that was absolutely a feature we wanted to incorporate.
Great.
Yeah. So again, still early in the process. We have got the thing, and now it's how do we deploy it well. I think we can provide it to the Informs members, like you had asked, and say go and use. And in the meantime, we are starting to formalize the processes for how we govern it well. The governance and the processes. How analytically mature are we with our analytic maturity model? So, all right. So let me show you it now. If there aren't any other questions. Okay. So like I said, there are 3 sheets. Each sheet is dedicated to an aspect of the analytic maturity model. This one captures how mature is your organization. There you see people, leadership, and measures. And let me go ahead and highlight one of these. And let's talk about people. The survey question is, how pervasive is the acceptance of analytical techniques and professionals within your organization? A little squishy, right? Well, you can see the Likert scale: low, 1 to 3, medium, 4 to 7, high, 8 to 10. We offer some resolution on that. And it is as follows. Within a score of low, 1 to 3, and the reason why we thought Likert was important is because actually as some of the first testers, maybe among one of them, I said, I'm a low, but I'm not low, I'm on the high end of low, I'm almost a medium. So we gave them some excuses. And I think actually that's important because these other models just say low, medium, high, or lower, yes or no. So we say low means, and the words that are in bold and italics are meant to call out. So if you're watching that online video, you'd see the practitioner giving the survey saying, are we isolated? Are you an analyst on an island? Are you isolated C-level individuals of or committees that make ad hoc decisions? Yes, that's a 1, kinda, 2, or 3. Or at the medium level, multiple C-level and business units executives, so talking about the level of employment, make decisions using analytics. The impacts are measured and reported by multiple managers. So you're starting to talk about how much is in that fiefdom, 4 to 7. And then high, all C-level and business units at all management levels make decisions using analytics. Impacts are measured and reported broadly throughout the business. So you can start to see how we're offering context to what that question means and helping you answer that question. Now, if you cannot answer that question right now, do not be dismayed. The model ain't broke. When we have done coaching on this model so far, doing some of the testing, it has taken about 4 hours to go through all of these questions and answer. It is a thought-provoking process. It is hard. You are exhausted at the end of it, but it is wildly useful. Because not only do you provide the score that tells you your low, medium, or high, 1 to 10, but then after you've gone through and done all your as-is scores, I'm getting ahead of myself perhaps, but after you've gone through page 1, 2, and 3, you next rock back in your chair and you say, what is our goal? Now, I actually had someone else in the federal government take this, an intelligence agency, and when they returned it to me, and shame on me because I didn't proctor them, they said our goal is 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. I was like, wow, how aggressive, that's fantastic. And I think all of us would want to be a 10.
Why?
Well, it's because you're the best in business, you're best in show, best in class perhaps.
I think you should link it to the strategy of the business.
Yes, sir, kind of like what you were alluding to.
My question was the same thing, that I'm not sure I can convince anybody. Till what I've heard right now is 8 is better than 7, or 9 is better than 8. Or somehow to motivate the fact that, so this is, to me it feels as if there is an assumption that 10 is good and everybody agrees on that.
Right.
And you just want to check, where are you?
I'll tell you what, I don't think, and again, I'm sorry to go back to the Marine Corps, but this is the last place I employed it. The Marine Corps is never going to be a 10. I don't think you as taxpayers want us to have the Cadillac of analysis. I did advocate that we move to the 8. I didn't say that was our goal. As a matter of fact, when I did this assessment, our goals were to get to somewhere in the mediums. Because the goal is meant to be not where do you want to be when you die. It's meant to be where do you think you can get within a realistic period of time. So as Director of Logistics Analysis at Headquarters Marine Corps Pentagon, my goals were typically by July 2013. We're obviously past that date, but prior to my departure, we're July 2013 or January 2014. And I said, this is where we will get in incremental steps. When I see us purchase this or write this policy that's going to reform that, that is our next step. And sir, I'll be able to come back and report to you that you are no longer a score in the low, but you are now a score in the medium. And we will assess when we arrive there, is that good enough? Or is it time to do another assessment and see where we can go next? So it's baby steps. And I think that this part of the model is perhaps simple, but an important management science. Institute for Operations Research and Management Science is an important management science to help someone identify their as-is. Understand a realistic goal. I'm not going to go from benching 95 pounds to 300 pounds overnight, but how do I need to get in the gym so that I am better next week and the month after that? So that I can have a goal score of getting maybe to 200 pounds. And my milestone plan will be to do, my milestone is that date, and the action plan is what I'm going to purchase, what I'm going to do, what I'm going to write, who I'm going to hire, who I'm going to fire to make those things happen. And as you go through this process, that is what became so valuable to me. I was able to communicate with a 3-star general, sir, this is how we're going to get from A to B to Z. Incremental steps, practicality, efficiency, organization, priority. And this helped me organize my file.
So who do you expect to respond to this? Is it the analyst who will fill out this form?
So that is both the choice and danger of all of this. It's easier for the person who says that they know everything,
Right.
and I'm going to answer, and this is a way, but probably better is to have a committee where the chief analytical officer or the chieftain of that organization sits down, has that coach or has that person with the organization, and they have a discussion. Like I said, the coaching we did, a 4-hour discussion with 4 people included. It took a while. And of course, you know, if you were to add another person, perhaps the score would vary greatly. All models are wrong. Some are useful. This is meant to be useful. And as much as you're still using qualitative input, you're driving to an eventual utility in the quantitative output. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, for me.
Your question was, and I don't know if the camera picked it up, is who do you have answer it? And the answer is choose your poison.
No, I get it, yeah. To me, this would not be useful in isolation. It would be useful if there were benchmarks. So I can't answer the goal column unless I know first what the others are doing, right?
Others who?
So first I need to benchmark either within my organization
Okay.
or, you know, within.
So actually, no, that was a great point. I'm sorry. And you are actually alluding to something that is not on this sheet. The version on another laptop calls that goal score, calls that goal. It actually changes these two columns, and it's great for us to have this discussion because this is meant to be a group of input. We actually have changed milestone. It actually, where it says goal, it says milestone target, and where it says milestone, it's milestone date. So we thought that the word was probably a misnomer. I'm sorry for not having that updated in this brief. People were thinking, goal, I want to be a 10, got it. Or I want to be a 9 or an 8, got it. Where can I get next? So that is an important nuance that's been corrected in the scorecard. And thank you for bringing that up. Does that help people maybe alleviate any fears with saying that?
I have a question.
We'll hear it in there. Sir.
Just a follow-up to that. It seems that is this self-assessing to some point? That is, you can find the analyst or whoever the person is, and maybe it's even at a C-level that is in charge of this, or maybe it's just a single person. I'm thinking if this person is going to help self-assess, either if that person's going to say, yeah, we're 10s across the board because I'm doing a great job and I don't want to get fired, or gee, we're 1s, I'm terrible, what in the hell, fire me. I don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
How does that happen? How do you get the truth?
Unfortunately, humans suck. And will always cause problems with the way in which we quantitatively and qualitatively assess ourselves. There you have the boss that's going to have to accept or reject assessments. You know, we cannot tell. Perhaps the most useful thing will be for that CEO to listen to his CEO and say, got it, you say that we're 11s, ain't such a score up there, but you say we're 11s, Informs, can you validate that for me? There's the help. There's the rub, perhaps, in Informs being handy and available.
But they're going to have to know that information. They're going to have to have
You're right.
cooperation from the analyst.
Exactly. And more of they say, okay, where are the other folks in my industry? So you say we're an 11, you say we're a 10, but this other group is outperforming us. They're so much more marketable, or they're so much more profitable. Why are we a 10 and they say that they're a 7, but they're killing us? Competing on analytics. Give them the book.
Yeah.
Sir.
You said it took about 4 hours. For how big an organization? I'm picturing I could do it for my department in 4 hours. I couldn't do it for the national organization. I certainly couldn't do it for the multinational.
Well, this is an organization that provides the global logistics for 182,000 persons across the globe.
So
You think that was probably quick work, and I agree, it is quick work. Could we have spent more time on it? We could have, but we're roughing out a score. Candidly, the committee talking, in my previous employer, so I went to the Marine Corps, went somewhere else, and now with Accenture. Our previous employer, when we were talking about doing this for other groups, and my proposition about being early adopters was, and I would advocate, probably a great way to do this would be to go in for a half day, explain the model, and rough out some terms. Go back the next day after everyone's slept on it, ingest it a little bit, and score out the as-is score. Go away. Come back the next day for the half day, and show the results, and start talking, okay, brass tacks and nails, how are we moving forward? So I had seen it, and I had proposed that it would be about a 3-day process, with then a Thursday and a Friday, or even another week after that, to start really developing the report and the summary statistics that you could then present to leadership. Now, my leadership, and what I would advocate leadership doing, is making this a part of their business routine. An annual or credit or a quarterly review. This becomes part of your performance metrics. How are we doing, analytically speaking? How do we compare to other industry leaders? Where are we going? oh, that's right, we were going to invest in that thing by August 13. We forgot about that. Is it too late to do it by November? And so it helps you, create an exercise plan and stay with it. Any other questions? Okay, so that's the first. That's the first page. The other ones are going to seem similar, but I'm going to bore you with reading them again, just through repetition. They're much better understanding. This gets to analytic capability, framework, roles and skills, analytic services, and analytic processes. Now, I think processes are often absent. So let's read that question. Are the organization's analytics processes well-defined, used, and integrated? Fuzzy again. Let's talk about what's a low score. Analytical processes not defined. Meaning, there's no policy, there's no order, there's no handbook. Medium score, 4 to 7. Analytics processes are defined. Processes are used routinely to deliver analytic information to other organizational processes, which means there isn't just an analyst flying by night with an Excel spreadsheet and that impacting a corporate decision. There's a dance card. And then the last caveat of having a medium score, it's not completely integrated, where processes are defined and used in parts of the organization, but not across the entire organization. So it means some folks have processes and do them very well, perhaps the procurement section, but it's not integrated well with the logistics section. So that's why we're not moving to a high. High score, standardized analytic processes are established across the corporation. Analytic processes are integrated with all key organizational processes and decisions. Does that help kind of frame the context for analytic maturity? All right, so not to beat a dead horse, we'll go on to the last sheet, where how mature are data and infrastructure in terms of health, data health, access, traceability, and analytics architecture. What would you like to look at? Anyone, anything on there stand out to you as a personal peeve or you'd like me to read? How about data? Let's talk about data health. Does your organization have quality data? What's that mean? For analytics, and to what extent does your organization employ data quality management practices across the organization? Okay, so now you've intrigued me a little bit. Define those things for me in terms of low, medium, high. Low, data quality is unknown. We've got data, who's got it? Limited or no management practices are established. I am intimately familiar where this is the case. Previously. Data quality metrics are established, is a medium score, as is data quality management practices exist, but within a part of the organization. So we now start getting into cylinders, highly polished cylinders of excellence, not shared throughout the corporation. And then a high score, data quality metrics used for scoring data resource health and made available to all organizational users. So this is great. Who has a data readiness metric? And are you using them? Are you reporting on them? Or are you only using data to report on other things? The data's got to report on itself to a degree. And throughout the organization. And there's ownership, complete ownership, responsibility for master data, that has been established. So accountability. There's obviously no responsibility if you don't ever have accountability. And so we're advocating that that be a characteristic of a very mature organization. So as I've provided those definitions for low, medium, and high, what are your thoughts about the Likert scale? Is that just cute, or is that useful? Do you start to see how you can maybe be a 1, a 2, or a 3? What's your feedback? Let me put you on the spot. What's your feedback on a Likert scale?
I'm actually having difficulty in kind of seeing how would I rate something 3 versus a 2, and will there be a difficulty? So if there is going to be a benchmark, a 3 for a different organization, even though in the same field. Mm-hmm. So let's say it's logistics or supply chain. Would a 3 for a particular organization would be the same thing as a 3 for another one, especially because you're making qualitative judgments. So I'm kind of having difficulty with
that's really great. So in a coaching material, training material, we'll probably have to figure that out. So for me, and having done this a few times, it's kind of like, how much can I color in that bubble? To color in that bubble all the way, I have to say that I am characterizing all of those things that are there 100% of the time. if I'm characterizing that half of the time, or one of those two things, I'm coloring the bubble halfway, so that'd probably make me a 2. If, oh my God, I'm supposed to be doing that? I didn't even know there was such a thing as data health. It's probably a 0. Now, probably a little bit more delicate and more difficult is judging where you're on a 4, 5, 6, or 7, right? So again, a 7 if you are embodying all of those characteristics. If you're definitely embodying everything that is on the low and then maybe a few more things to boot, you're probably a 4. And then figure out the squishiness in between. It's not a perfect model. And I think perhaps you and I in parallel universes are in charge of the same organization, and I write a 4 and you score 5. That really doesn't change my overall assessment and where I need to go, right? It tells me a score, but then to improve something that is plaguing my business most, I develop the action plan, the milestone target and the milestone date, right? So that's where I'm seeing it help. But I understand your reservation. I think you're right. We'll have to create some kind of an analogy, like, can you color in the whole bubble?
Yeah,
4 out of 5 stars?
Why don't you just have a definition for number, like he's saying, or like
Definition.
what you're describing?
Yeah.
Instead of saying a no for 1 to 3, why not 1 is equal to this, 2 is equal to this?
Yeah.
3 is equal to this?
Well, candidly, the Likert scale is something that got added on after. It was originally just low, medium, high. But that is what a lot of the other tools have already. Matter of fact, they'll just say, how healthy is your data? And they won't even provide a definition. Some of the other models that are out there, it is either low, medium, or high, or even the 5 scales or whatever have you. That's not very helpful. So we added the definitions, and those were hard enough to define in just 3 contexts. I think if we were to break it down to 10, that would be over modeling, because you'll get to the point where, well, hang on, I am doing what it says in 4, but I'm not doing what it says in 3. So what am I? How can I get to 4 without getting to 3? And so by having a little bit less resolution, it allows some squishiness. So does that help? And perhaps your overall score is, are you as an organization on average low, medium, and high? And then you can adjust your scope a little bit more and see that I'm on average a 7 or 6 or 6 and a 5 here. So I think it's a neat feature, but I understand your reservation. That's a good point for us to
It
capture.
does seem like there's a big difference between a 3 and a 4 and a 7 and an 8 than there might be between a 1 and a 2. You're taking another grade up.
So, help me.
There's a bigger difference between a 3 and a 4 and a big difference between a 7 and 8,
Yep.
as opposed to, say,
Yeah.
going from an 8 to a 9.
By design. No, that's by design. So we absolutely did. That is actually by design. And we actually came back in here and we created a little bit more dispersion amongst those categories, because we wanted people to see that they had to take a big step to get into that 4, 5, 6, 7 category. And so it was purposefully made that you could move within a category easier, but you have to move, substantially to get into the next higher category. Does that kind of make sense? Do you understand why we would do that? Yeah. So it shows a demonstrable step in terms of maturity. You have gone from being a teenager to a young adult. All right. So we'll conclude with this next slide. No, 2 more slides, but the way forward for us is to, after we do some of these assessments, and please unload your feedback when I come to the question slide. I even have some backup slides if necessary. We can go back, of course. But after we have your assessments, both as Informs members and perhaps as those consultants that have gone out and deployed this model, we are loading the database that is going to allow us to compare amongst pillars of industry. And then turn this model into a qualitative thing, a quantitative thing as well, not just qualitative. And then the diagnostics and the analysis that we can perform on this, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 200,000 surveys from now forward are going to be important to us. And they will help us, moreover, as a society, understand emerging concepts. Where are the innovative technologies? How does the model need to be dynamic and grow? And help the organization identify new opportunities, and help organizations as well identify new processes or things about maturity that they ought to consider. So in conclusion, with the analytic maturity model, with the certified analytics professional exam, with a lot of things that Informs is looking to avail to its customers, we are positioning ourselves well to be a lead amongst the analytic community and to stay ahead of the pack. Not having an analytic maturity model is to allow folks to go elsewhere and perhaps pay a premium. We need to offer this to our members, and perhaps have them be both practitioners and have equity in what they've also developed. And Informs can use the analytic maturity model, as you saw, to future services, spawn new opportunities and new memberships. The committee and staff are working, again, to present this at the Analytics Conference more formally, and perhaps finally in spring 2014. And now, at the end of this brief, we pause and ask you to share just as much as you can to make this your better model. Any questions? Sir?
Well, more just to get to the point of the Likert scale and using with the descriptions is like, yeah, I did like it, having the descriptions at the course level, the Likert with more details, because certainly every time I've filled out things, or I've gotten other people to fill out things, which I do, inevitably you give a description of the level,
Yeah.
what people want to do is like do a half, or
Yeah.
a bit more, because when they think through it, they realize there's a bit more complexity, and then they want to put that in. So I think that works.
There's a handful of folks that have, well, there's a lot of folks that have taken this on their own. Like I said, I gave it to an intelligence group. They took it and said, oh, we want to be 10s, and it was not governed. And when you don't govern a model, it's kind of, you can go astray. But folks who have actually proctored it and given it, there's a handful of those folks. So how do we grow that base to include you? And that is by definitely making sure that we provide that guidebook so that when you and I are talking about data health, you and I are talking to both ourselves and to the people we're looking to help in the same context. And so absolutely, and I'm not responsible for writing that. Isn't that Flynn? I think Flynn is writing the guidebook.
Yes, he is. John Flynn.
John Flynn is writing the
DRCI.
Yeah, DRC. He's written it. We already have a draft form. We're reviewing it. Deploy that and say, here, go download and use and understand these terms better. Because even those italics and bolds, they're nice, but they're not everything. So, yeah.
There's people added in.
Yes, sir.
In particular, anybody technical.
And let's all commit to, let me commit you all to do this. Because barring any of you throwing a spear through this at the conclusion of the meeting today, and it'll probably take more than that, this is going forward in some way, form, or fashion. I would like to commit all of you, I would like to ask all of you to join me at Informs Analytics in Boston, or Informs Annual next year as well, so that we can talk about this. And we can talk again as a society, because I guarantee you that either Norm will have the stage, or someone else in the committee will have the stage, and we'll talk about it. So how have we done? How do we improve it? And what rub do we have so far? So all deputies now, please, in helping it be the right model. Any other questions or feedback? Ma'am, anything?
Oh, I was just going to ask actually earlier, how, you said the Likert scale is something that is new in this model that doesn't exist. So how do they benchmark if they don't use a Likert scale? Do they just provide definitions? I mean,
Yep.
descriptions?
So, let me ask my friend something. All right. I consulted legal. IBM's analytics quotient model, which you can all go online and take. So, you can say, well, they have a Likert scale because there's 4 multiple choices. But this is a Likert scale you go online and take. And, I'm sorry, this is the model you take. So what types of data sources do you analyze when making decisions? And here you would answer one of those radio buttons. And that's the extent of the material. Now, when you get to the end, you have your score. Register to learn more about the maturity model. Would you like to talk with a consultant? So how do we instead put that power in your hands as members to walk your organizations through that? Does that make sense? So what we have seen repeatedly throughout those, you can, again, go to IIA. I'm forgetting the health services that they're affiliated with, and you can see, that it is A, B, or C. The Likert scale, again, holds a little bit more resolution, and moreover, and they could throw on the Likert scale tomorrow if they wanted to, but the definitions, the guidebook, and then on top of that, the as is, the to be score, the milestone target, and the milestone date are supremely important. And for me, in government, as well as now in commercial, it's important for me to be able to articulate a roadmap, a data strategy that prioritizes and invests over time and not all at once. You can't go and become the best tomorrow. You can't win the Edelman Prize next year. You're going to have to get there in 3 or 4 years. But do you know what that is? Do you know what that looks like? So, Yes, sir. We'll come back over
How do
here.
you guys envision it appearing on the website? So it will be like that, you fill it out online, or can you download it and do it yourself?
Yes.
Yes to both?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We want the materials to be deployable. Obviously, you're not going to be on a computer. Matter of fact, I don't want to have a screen up. When I've done it, I've printed out. Matter of fact, if you came to the Birds of the Feather in San Antonio, we had a huge, gosh, it was like a 4 by 8 foot poster printed out of the model, and at that time it was all squished together. And that would be useful. And you know, when I do my analytics consulting with managers, I use we all use whiteboards, right? You're not an analyst if you don't know what a whiteboard, if you don't have a couple in your office. So we use whiteboards and massive Post-it notes, and we shift them around the room. That's the way you got to do it. And then it's up to you to go back and compute it, perhaps upload it. Perhaps you don't want to upload it, right? Perhaps that's a condition of you performing the analysis. Keep it a secret, or keep it anonymous. So we need to allow those features as well. Disclose or do not disclose who you are and how you do it. So great things we'll have to walk through. And that's what you saw on the action plan, which is coming up this December through April, is working with IT to figure out the deployable aspects of it. If you can be of help with that, or if you have any good insights or things you like, I'm sure the committee would like to incorporate you, or perhaps even enlist your support. Sir.
Will this come up with one score? In the sense that you have 3 or 4 sections, like organization, analytic capabilities. Will you provide a score for the individual components?
At all resolutions. And so you'll see your overall score, which we're going to do through a data development method. So we're talking about how do we really characterize this best as a weighted scale data development. How do you characterize that score? How do you average it? So what is your single score? Then how do you maybe create that radar plot of those 3 scores? And then how do you break it down to that radar plot of those 12 scores? And so you can see your physicality compared to the physicality of others. So you know, where are you nearly filling that plot out? Are you a half moon and your competitor is more of a full moon? So how do you grow that? So I think that will show I'd call that just the physicality of the organization's analytic maturity. Physical characteristics. Sorry, if you had something on
No,
that you're talking.
I had some in my eye.
Okay. That's what I used to say to my professor. Okay. Well, sir, do you have any input? You traveled far for this presentation. From the Netherlands, you didn't come for this.
I won't disappoint you there. I think the link to where a company wants to be and helping them set goals is something that you could also think of. So it's not only scoring how well you perform right now, but also setting priorities on what would be the next step, and so, giving some guidance for companies to set those goals in a realistic way is something I would be most interested in.
Yes, sir. So that's kind of where I think the coaching is really important, right? So getting the analyst that understands data science, that understands analytics and model development and deployment is a tricky thing. There's not many out there. So being able to coach them realistically through that is an important thing. Someone going to say, ignorantly, well, we're going to answer our data problem with Hadoop. Do you know what Hadoop is? And so, absolutely, how do you install that, and what is a realistic time frame? And that's the value of getting Inform's members to come together and wiki it, as was mentioned, or to provide that in the guidebook.
It's also about knowing what kind of companies are looking for this kind of modeling, how to assess their maturity. Because I think that there will be different levels for each of the 12 boxes that match to certain, let's say, industries. So some industries will be very data intensive. For example, the online marketing will probably also have much higher goals in maturity. For example, a bottom-on, let's say, service provider in logistics. They have different needs, and therefore, I think also would require different profiles, and therefore also different growth paths in increasing maturity. So that is the thing I guess will come from the Informed community, because it is a widespread community, but it could also be, let's say, helping companies simply by getting all that information provided.
So just to be clear, you're saying there'll be different profiles by industry. Are you suggesting different profiles, so a different understanding and application of the scorecard amongst industries, or are you talking about a different scorecard amongst industries?
I think different interpretation. If I do a comparison with, for example, IT maturity, NASA needs to be very mature
Yeah.
because they shoot rockets up into the sky. While, let's say, normal planning software doesn't need to have
Right.
that's
Yeah.
standard. That's the kind of, let's say, comparison I'm making. So I think that
Yes, sir.
analytics would be.
Absolutely, I agree with you, and that's one of the things I'm most excited to see here is, principally being in supply chain and products industries, I'm interested in learning more about what are the profiles of analytics in other industries and communities, healthcare, for example. Where is that radar, what is the common look for that radar plot or other way in which you want to visualize it for healthcare compared to logistics? And that's interesting, and just because healthcare isn't as robust as logistics might be, or online retailing, that doesn't make it wrong. Let's assess it amongst others. So I agree with you, that's fantastic. I don't think I'm a proponent of changing the scorecard too much, because then you have different versions of the gospel.
The scorecard should be the same, I think, but it is how you, let's say, benchmark and how you
Sure.
compare.
Yeah, I just wish we could be able to do that faster, because I think that's the real value here, right? But we're not going to be able to do that until you capture the data. It's kind of like, what's our mean time between failure? Don't know until you start capturing enough data to compute that. So we'll get there, but help us get there as you hear through the magazines and the emails and other broadcast messages that we're ready for you to help us and start scoring yourselves. This is something that you can have access to already. You can start to take some of your own assessments. You can get copies of the slides, as you know, right after this brief. And you can print it out and try to blow it up and start saying, well, how am I? Perhaps you'll develop your own model. Okay. But do it, because it has, in as much as I use the score unofficially, it helped me already. And I see it as a great opportunity. As a matter of fact, a service that should accompany every single thing, every single project I do. When I go in there and I'm selling a customer on something, this is what I'm going to do, because this is where I assess you today. And at the end of the project, this is where you're going to be. And it's not, you're going to be better because I say so. You're going to be better because according to what Inform says, an analytic mature organization, I will have helped you get there in a milestone fashion. My thoughts. Barry, I should turn the time over to you. We are at an hour? Has it been an hour? Yeah, an hour. Well, we're almost at an hour and a half. So Barry, do you
We're
have
very
anything to
much
add?
towards the end of our program, so thank you all for joining us. If you'd like my business card or Aaron's business card, or if you'd like to discuss anything after the conclusion, feel free to step forward. Thank you and have a great conference.